all concentrating on what's happening on the presidential ballot. Maybe you have your favorite race. I know there's a U.S. Senate race, and then we have other state representative races, and yeah, you get the state ballot questions. Oh, yay! But there's some communities, like the town of Whitman, they're going to have a special question that is special unto themselves. Have you ever heard of the Community Preservation Act? Well, there are some folks who have, and there are some who may see it and not know what exactly that alludes to. There are communities in and around the South Shore that have since voted on it, whether it's over the past couple of years, and are actually they're bearing fruit from those seeds planted, and joining us to discuss what Whitman is going. It's going to kind of give us the nuts and bolts of what's going on in his community. We have Justin Evans, who is a selectman in the town of Whitman. Justin, welcome to the conversation, my friend.
Thank you, Kevin. It's nice to be here.
So how did it come to be that the town of Whitman decided to embark on the Community Preservation Act? What did it take?
So to get to this point, as with every community that enters the Community Preservation Act, it takes either a vote of town meeting or a citizens initiative, and it takes a ballot question to pass it. So the town of Whitman specifically, I'd been talking about this with now interim town administrator Lisa Green since I was on the finance committee and she was the assistant town administrator. So this is a little bit of a long time planning to get here. But finally in 2020, we got everything together, and at an outdoor town meeting with 400 people sitting on the field of the high school baseball field, we overwhelmingly passed the first step to put it on the ballot and get to where we are today.
See, what's interesting is hearing you explain it. I've seen so many different times when, and I'm talking about something totally different, a Prop 2.5 override, and folks overwhelmingly vote for it at town meeting. Again, this is apples and oranges. But what exactly will happen if folks vote, whether they do it early voting or whether they vote on November 3rd? What ends up happening if it's approved?
So if the Community Preservation Act is approved by the town of Whitman, first we will create a community preservation fund, and that fund will accrue over the course of indefinitely, but each year money will be appropriated to it by from two different locations. So first there will be the local surtax. Whitman opted for 1% of the current property taxes will be an additional 1%, but it is 1% of your taxes less $100,000 in value. So it's a little complicated. For the average Whitman resident, that's about $40 per single family home annually. So that's the first pool of money. And if it passes in 2021, that'll raise about $187,000. The second pool of money is the state match. And this is the real incentive for towns to start joining this program. So over the last 5 years, the match has averaged about 20%. Last year was 24%. Next year, we're looking at 18%, where the state will give additional money. And that is mostly funded by local real estate transfer taxes. So when homes are bought and sold, there's a transfer tax, goes into a pool and builds up the state's community preservation fund. Combination of those two things get dispersed to, well, the funds are raised by communities that are part of this program, and they can use it on a number of local initiatives.
What are some of the initiatives that I'm sure yourself and there are others who have dreamed of? What do you see the pool of money that Whitman would be able to accrue going towards?
So if I can get a little into the weeds on this,
Please.
The structure of it is that 10% has to be used for open space and recreation, 10% has to be used for community housing, and 10% has to be used for historic preservation. And the remaining 70% can be used by any of those three categories. So what we see a lot of towns around us doing is funding a lot of their outdoor recreation, field maintenance. I think Hanson plans on redoing the fields at the middle school with this program. Abington is doing some work at the Griffin Dairy Farm just about every year, doing additional steps toward it. So our neighbors are using this money for a lot of recreation, open space. There are other communities doing some historic preservation work, a lot of community housing work. So, but it tends to fall in those categories.
What are some of the things that the opposition would say to something like this? Because you have to think of both sides. I think both sides of the particular issue. Is it a matter if they see it just as another tax? Are you hearing people say that?
I'm hearing a little bit of that when you explain to them that there is this separate pool of money that will be matched. There's state funds available that we're paying into with our transfer taxes, with our real estate transfer taxes already, that we don't have access to. That tends to um, ease some of the concerns on this is another tax.
And I liken this also to when you had mentioned about it as far as a pool, and of course, the money's dropped, that the percentage that they match dropping. It reminds me of the Massachusetts School Building Authority, where there was a time when you would go through a process. Let's say you wanted to build a school, you needed to do some upgrades to a school, and there was a time that I think the state, there was a resounding amount of money that the state would match. That has since dropped because it has become such a popular program, and so many communities are buying in and are putting in, a request, putting in proposals to do things that then that percentage that the state is going to match, or at least provide those additional fundings. It's going to drop because of the popularity of it. Am I correct? Is that the same thing with the CPA?
Yeah, so the CPA has seen a little bit of that. This program was created in 2000, and at the time it was a one-to-one match. So for every dollar a community put up, the state would put in a dollar.
Yep.
And the towns that got in at the beginning have raised a ton of money and done some pretty fantastic projects in that span. Towns that are jumping in now, you're seeing, about an average of 20% is the state match. And the state budget last year committed additional monies to this fund to prevent it from running out. So there is a clear emphasis by the governor and the legislators on Beacon Hill to continue to fund community preservation projects.
Now, would another separate committee have to be formed, like a community preservation committee, to have discussions with the community about what to do with money once there's a built up enough pool?
So that's exactly what it's going to take. The funds that are hold on, give me a sec.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's exactly what it will take. The funds that are built up over the course of 2021, which would be about $220,000 from the two sources, will need to be overseen by a community preservation committee. And that committee would be made up of members of the Housing Authority, of the Recreation Commission, the Historical Society, and a couple of other community groups, as well as any at-large seats that the town might choose to add to that committee. And that committee, the Community Preservation Committee, would then recommend articles to town meeting to fund projects that meet the scope of the Community Preservation Act. If there are any large capital projects, so for example, the town of Easton has been restoring some of their historical buildings, and Whitman has some of those as well, town hall, fire station. If any large capital projects were recommended, it would also go to the Buildings, Facilities, and Capital Expenditures Committee, and then to town meeting.
So with a particular fund like now, what kind of an account, again, if this passes, if this is something that the residents say, yes, this is what we want, what kind of an account is this? And is this something that accrues interest? Is there any kind of, this is kind of two-pronged question here. Is there something that is subjected to any kind of fees, like, processing fees by the town?
So this is an account that it's a revolving account, like some other town accounts are structured. So the money, you can continue to build the account over several years if there's a large project you see a little down the road. A lot of towns will get a jump start on it and form smaller revolving accounts, affordable housing trust fund, or some sort of recreation account to fund at town meeting from the community preservation funds. And then over the course of the year, have access to those if there were like a Habitat for Humanity project that kind of popped up at the last minute. If you've got an affordable housing trust fund set aside already, then I believe it would be the Board of Selectmen would have access to that money to move forward in the middle of a year and not wait for a town meeting or call a special town meeting.
And where did you kind of explained the process, how it was voted and everything. What are the conversations that you've been hearing from people as we're leading up to the big vote? What are you hearing from people? Do you feel that people are um, energized by this? They see it as an avenue to be able to do some of those things that you've mentioned, whether it's to, do something with town park. Whitman has a fantastic town park, or do something with some of the historical landmarks or buildings in town.
So it's because it's 2020. This is flying a little under the radar of the presidential election. So everybody remember this is on the back of the ballot, question 3. But what I'm hearing specifically on the Community Preservation Act is kind of requests for specific things. Asking kind of the nitty gritty. Can we have a pickleball court? Which Abington funded out of CPA funds a couple of years ago. I think they expanded and added lights to be used at night behind the senior center. Some other things about, the town voted exemptions, income exemptions into this as well at town meeting. So as it's going to be voted on the ballot, if you make less than, if any family in Whitman makes less than 80% of the median income as defined by the Department of Housing and Urban Development, they don't have to pay into this fund. And any family with a member over 60 that makes less than 100% of the median area income doesn't have to pay into this either. So there's some pretty generous exemptions, and a lot of the confusion is around that.
And knowing how things are these days, what are your concerns knowing that we are thrust into a pandemic out of nowhere at the beginning of 2020? Here we are cruising towards the end of 2020. This is a fantastic initiative. What are your concerns in regards to getting out information like this to people?
So it is a little difficult. There are 9 communities in the state that have this on the ballot this year. A number of them have created outside groups to promote the news. Whitman didn't do that, or no citizen in Whitman took that up. So I am trying to just get the word out myself. A couple of other citizens helping to promote it as well. So writing articles to the local paper, posting on Facebook, sharing things on my blog. If you've got any questions about this specifically, votejustinevans.com/blog. I'll break down how much it'll cost if you're exempt, potential projects that we could fund. And so it's been difficult not being able to, nobody's out holding signs or knocking doors. It's just not that kind of year.
It's interesting that you also had mentioned that it's on the backside of the ballot. It's not something where folks will be able to look at. You gotta actually turn it over. Are you hoping that have you had any conversations with Dawn Varley, your town clerk, and some of her staff and volunteers who are going to be part of not only early voting but also for election day?
So I spoke to them a little bit. I have heard from somebody who did forget to turn the ballot over. So it is a risk, but luckily question 2 is right above it on the backside, and it is being pretty well advertised. So I think most people will know to vote the ballot questions as well as the candidates. It's just a matter of getting information about this specific question out.
And not to muddle the waters here, but yeah, I mean, what are your thoughts on having those other ballot questions? Have you had a chance to invest a few minutes to look at question 1, which is about right to repair, or ranked choice voting, which is question 2?
I have actually. Yeah, I'm a big fan of question 2. I actually signed the ballot initiative back when they tried to get on the ballot in 2018 to move ranked choice voting. I just think it's although this is contentious, I think it's a more democratic way to decide things than some of the primaries we've seen in the last few years that have had, 23% is the winning margin among 9 people, and that person will overwhelmingly win the general and go to Congress to represent, I forget what district, Joe Kennedy's old seat.
Yeah, you had that. You just yeah, and I believe that carried over for a couple of days because there was such a fraction of a percentage between candidates. It was
Yeah,
interesting.
I actually think the biggest, the most, the best example for why I think that question 2 is ranked choice voting is a good idea is the Fall River recall election, the mayoral election a couple of years ago,
Oh, sure.
which I'm sure you remember, but I
I
don't know
do.
that all the listeners will. on the same ballot, the mayor was recalled and reelected because a majority of people voted him out, but then there were so many candidates running that he won with a plurality of the vote.
Right. Yeah, but then he ended up stepping anyways, didn't he? I
He ended
mean,
up well, there were more legal challenges for him
allegations.
down the road.
Right, right, right. Not that we want to get lost in the weeds on that particular one.
Right.
We got a couple of minutes left here in our conversation, and I think it's worth me asking: is there anything that we haven't touched upon? Anything we haven't thoroughly explained to the folks who are taking time to take in this information? Is there anything that we might have missed that you want to touch upon?
I mean, we did touch on the exemptions. I wanted to highlight that there are a couple of things that if this passes, if I get an opportunity to recommend projects to the committee, things that Whitman could really use. Um, when you get past the first level of restoring and replacing some of our athletic fields at all of our schools, um, there are things like funding an economic development plan that would potentially use 40R zoning. Towns have funded that through through the housing money of this because it's economic development with housing. It counts. I would like to see more money funded toward the housing authority. That's currently like a 5-year wait for the Whitman Housing Authority to get to live there. Um, some of the historic preservation stuff I touched on the town hall and fire station, but we've got a historic downtown that could use a little bit of work. We've got 2 cemeteries that would count as historic. And then, I mean, any number of recreation and open space initiatives, but you never really know when Abington had the Griffin Dairy Farm. You never know when something like that is going to come up and there's an opportunity for the town to acquire more open space.
Well, that's fantastic, and I want to thank you so much. And it's funny you mentioned 40R. I think, if I'm correct, didn't Rockland do a 40R?
They did. I don't know how they funded it, but they did pass a 40R district. That might be one of my goals in the future.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you again for so much for joining me. And just to remind folks, if they want to catch your blog and they want to find out more information and do a deeper dive, drill down more, how can they find out more information?
So yeah, I'm on Facebook. Yeah, Justin Evans, Whitman Selectman, across all social media at Vote Justin Evans, and my blog is on my website, votejustinevans.com/blog, where I've got I think 3 posts up specifically related to the CPA.
Well, we want to thank you very much for taking a few minutes to talk a little bit about this very important question on the ballot. Folks, hopefully, will turn over and answer question 3 and pick one way or the other. So we thank you.
Thank you very much, Kevin.